coming. And this talk is Trends in Web Application Security. And I'll be introducing you to Ofer Shezaf from Breach Security.
Good morning, everyone. I would have preferred not to use this microphone and look like a pop star or something, but it seems that for the recording I need to. I probably have the most non-technical presentation around, but I do hope to make it interesting anyway. And I think the subject is important, because I think there is no security if we cannot measure what we provide to our organizations by doing more security. So I'm not going to talk about how to solve the application security problem and not how to break into things. I'm going to talk about how to measure it. How can we determine what to solve, what to protect, and what not to protect? I will base my discussion on a project I'm running within the Web Application Security Consortium, which is a sister organization to OWASP, which is called the Web Hacking Incident Database. It's a project that tracks security incidents just for that matter. So that's me in better times. That's when it's on the web, so people will be more personal and know who's the speaker. I work for Breach Security. We make WAFs, and that's all I'm allowed to say about my company. My job is product management, which has less to do with security, but until around half a year ago, I ran security research. And as a result, I'm very involved in many open source and community projects. For example, I run the Israeli chapter for OWASP, and actually we had a conference just last week in Israel with 250 people in it. And as I said, I'm from Israel. And Breach Security, I said I'm not going to say anything about Breach. So what are we going to talk about today? First of all, I'm going to discuss why is it so hard to know what is the risk, how to measure the risk from vulnerable web applications. I'll show how we do it today, and I'll show the shortcomings, the problems with the current approaches. Later, I'll present to you the Web Hacking Incident Database, which is an interesting tool to try to analyze the threat from web-based applications. I'll also discuss its shortcomings. It's not the perfect tool also. I'll summarize the results of our last annual survey, the 2007 survey, or statistical report based on the Web Hacking Incident Database. And then I'll go into what we see this year, where things are going. And the winner, okay. So the basic equation that we'll talk about is how to calculate risk. It's very boring, it's not technical, but it's the sole reason that our companies are paying us in order to provide security, to reduce risk. And risk is composed of three things. Threat. Is there anyone out there who's after us? Vulnerability. If there is someone out there who's after us, does he have any way to get into us, to breach our security? And the third one is the outcome. Okay, there's a bad guy, he wants to break into our organization, he has ways to do that. How much would we lose if he succeeds? So this is an old equation, it's not new. The main question is, how does it translate to web applications? So we know web applications are vulnerable. You'll hear about it all through the next 2 days. Web applications are unique. So each one has its own vulnerabilities, making signature-based system inadequate. Web applications change frequently because it's easy to change them. It's easy to create new, a new marketing campaign with 3 new forms. And if in the past they were at least simple and our developers understood how to what's happening behind the scenes, today they are very complex with Ajax and Web 2. As we will see today, web applications are threatened. The bad guys are after them. It didn't used to be that way. That's the reason I started the Web Hacking Incident Database project, to try to track that, to try to understand if the bad guys are after us. And today I think the question is simple. They are. And we'll discuss later the need for a business model for the bad guys. If there's no business model, if there's no way a bad guy can do real money, and I'm not talking about script kiddies, I'm talking about organized crime, we are not freedom. But we are today. And lastly, the impact. If somebody gets into our websites, is there's potential issue for us? And the answer is yes, because everything is web today, and if somebody gets in, they can do whatever they want. Stop us from doing business by taking our sites down, taking out information. Well, you know all that. The main question is then, how do we measure this risk? It's not easy. Why isn't it easy? The first reason is that web attacks are stealth. Unlike other types of threats, such as viruses or worms, which are very widespread, so everybody knows about them, many web attacks, especially until 2008, were spearheaded, were targeted. So nobody had a real reason to talk about it. If a bank is getting hit by a web hack, the best thing for the bank is to hide. The other problem is that organizations do not have insight into their applications. Think about a security guy who has no application background, monitoring his IDSs and firewalls and having a security information manager. He doesn't know if he's being hacked. We make application firewalls. When we get to organizations and we install, it's always installed first out of line, no blocking, and we see hacking going on. And the organization never knew about them. As a result, since people don't know about hacks, as people try to hide hacks, most statistics, as we'll see in the following slides, are skewed. There are certain types of attacks that just have to be disclosed, and we see a lot of them. The two most common ones are defacements, because defacement is disclosed by definition, and leakage of information, because for the last few years, a lot of governments have rules that require organizations to disclose or publish a breach in which sensitive information leaked. So if somebody got to a bank and stole $10 million from a specific customer, nobody has to tell us about it. It can remain a secret. The bank has to solve the issue with the customer. But if even 10 or a significant number of sensitive information records leaked, it has to be disclosed. And lastly, and that's what I'm trying to change today, a lot of the discussion in this field is by parties that have an interest. You all know that vendors are biased, that vendors tell you stories. That's why you come to the OWASP conference, because it's not about vendors. But on the other hand, in this specific area of web applications, you have the developers. And developers tend to think that their code is perfect, or at least not admit it's not perfect. So this is the other side of everybody has an interest. So what can we do today? How can we try to measure the risk? There are many databases which discuss and monitor vulnerabilities. You all use them, you all know about them, Backtrack, CVE, OS-VDB, and recently in the last 2 years, XSSED, which is a site monitoring vulnerabilities in websites, cross-site scripting vulnerabilities in websites. However, an important thing to remember is that these are just vulnerabilities. Nobody said that they are exploited in the wild. Nobody said it's easy to exploit them. Nobody said there's some reason for bad guys to exploit them. If you look at the list here, which I just took off the web last night, you'll see that the first 4 reported cross-site scripting vulnerabilities are from, well, yesterday. And actually, it's not just the first 4, it's just that I had room just for 4. The list is much longer. Does this really reflect how much hacking is going on? Probably no. It proves to us that our applications are not safe, but it doesn't prove that we have a risk. We have other, other projects we try to take the lists and make statistics out of them. One worth mentioning is the OWASP Statistics project, which is several pen testing companies taking the information they gather in penetration testing and aggregating it in order to find out what are the most common vulnerabilities. Their main finding year after year is that cross-site scripting is the most common vulnerability. And the OWASP top 10, which is one of the best things OWASP has done, is also based on such statistics. Specifically, it's based on CV, and we'll discuss it a bit later. So it's a good predictor of the level of vulnerability of your web application. On the other hand, it doesn't predict the threat and therefore the risk. We don't know if it really means that people are after you. And we want to spend dollars or euros or whatever currency you use. We want to know that there is a risk, not that we are vulnerable. We also have to decide which vulnerabilities to fix. And we'll discuss that a bit later. So we want to know who's attacking us, not just if we're vulnerable. Probably the most well-known resource about attacks is Zone H. Zone H is a site that discloses defacements. Dozens, hundreds, thousands of them. A bit like XSSED, it's fed by the bad guys. It's sort of, look what I succeeded in doing. And therefore, it suffers from reporting the non-important incidents. Those that are done and done in order to tell about them. It's also naturally skewed towards, well, it's only about defacements. So it gives a nice picture of how bad the situation is, but it's far from a good resource on how big is the risk. Another important thing to know is that, and it's true for most of the sources that we'll talk about, including the Web Hacking Incident Database, is that a lot of times you know there was an incident. You know that there was a damage done, but you don't know how it was done. Nobody will tell you. When we get to Web Hacking Incident Database, I'll have a story or two about that. A very intriguing project in this area is the WASP Open Proxy Honeypot project. It's a project where we install, WASP is again the Web Application Security Consortium. Ryan Barnett, a colleague of mine, is running this project. It's a project where we install Mod Security, which is an open source WAF that serves a proxy in different locations around the world, run by volunteers. And being a proxy, it attracts the bad guys to attack through it, to hide their identity. So many bad guys attack through it. And we want to try to get to a situation that we know what the bad guys are doing using that. The bad guys who do not want to disclose what they are doing, who do not want to shout, I just defaced somewhere. We found out that it's a nice idea. We are working towards it. The amount of information is just huge. So we do get attack vectors from there to analyze, to research, but we still don't have statistical information based on that. The last resource you'll see a lot and is used many times in order to assess risk are data loss databases. The reason for that is that, first of all, due to the regulations in many states and countries that requires disclosing data loss, it's an easy to get information. So it's the mirror image of Zone H, which is about defacements. And unlike defacements, which are hard to measure in the sense of how much does it cost to the organization, there are ways to measure how much a record lost costs to an organization. So you take a number from the data loss database, for example, attrition.org, but it's not the only one. You make a sort of a calculation of how much money it costs an organization to recover from data loss in paying damages, in issuing a new credit card to a customer, in providing free credit reports, in providing a service center for incoming inquiries from affected customers. And then you get an outcome. How bad is the situation? The problem with those databases is twofold. First of all, they are about data loss and not about how it occurred. So in many cases, I don't even know whether I can attribute it to web application issues. So I can't go and say this is due to web application vulnerabilities. The other problem, of course, is that it focuses only on a very specific aspect of hacking, which is stealing sensitive records. The result of that is that many times we focus on what we know. So we try to prevent data leakage, but we don't try to prevent other things we don't know about. Let's talk a bit about the OWASP Top 10. That's just the place to do that. The OWASP Top 10 is based on CVE. There's a big discussion on how to derive numbers for the next version, 2009 version of the OWASP Top 10. And as a result, it's driven by vulnerabilities. There is one catch or remark to that. It was done by experts, by the OWASP experts. And therefore, they provided some of their insight as to trends based on their experience to try to tweak things around. The best example is cross-site request forgery, which is nearly missing from CVE, especially for sure was in 2007, but it's an upcoming threat. So the group building the OWASP Top 10 decided to add it pretty high in the list. Okay. So you'll have to believe me that there was text there. Cross-site scripting, it always comes first very high when you talk about vulnerabilities. Why? I personally believe that it's a vulnerability that's easy to find. Now, it doesn't mean it's not common, it doesn't mean it's not dangerous, but there's still a question whether attackers are going after it. Injection flows, by the way, includes a lot of different attacks. I believe it was put as one attack, which is logical in a way, in order to be able to squeeze more entries into the OWASP Top 10. It's just 10. You can't have more than 10. So injection flows include SQL injection, as well as other attacks. There's an interesting question whether cross-site scripting is not an injection flow, but that's another story. We'll see later that according to the Web Hacking Incident Database, SQL injection, which is buried here within number 2, is the #1 attack vector used by the bad guys. And I think that today it's even more the case. And lastly, cross-site request forgery is an interesting question. It is an upcoming threat. It's something that pen testers would look after in websites and will tell customers to fix. And many applications suffer from that, and it's not easy to resolve. But do the bad guys take advantage of that? We'll see later. Okay, here comes the Web Hacking Incident Database. In the last slide, there's a link to it. What is it about? Around 3 years ago, Jeremiah Grossman and I started collecting, actually 4 years ago, time runs, stories. You know, people didn't believe there was such a problem as web hacking. You know, you can find an SQL injection, but does anybody really do bad things about that? So we started collecting publicly available information about web hacking. Stories from the press, from blogs, publicly known stories, not hush-hush stories that just we know about. We need to have a public disclosure of the story. Today, we have a database that includes incidents since 1999. We started categorizing each incident exactly in order to be able to have statistics over it. So for each incident, we try to know what the attack type is. As I said before, it's not always easy. I'll give you 2 examples. Card systems. Probably the first large-scale SQL injection attack ever, 2005, I believe. Outcome was very severe because the card system went bankrupt, so shareholders lost several tens of millions of dollars. I didn't put it into WHID for a long time. The reason was I never knew how it was done. Only a year and a half or 2 years later, the Federal Trade Commission came out with a report that explained what happened there. And it specified exactly that it was SQL injection. Very interesting SQL injection, by the way. So it took me 2 years to put into the database what at the time was probably the most well-known web application attack around. I since relaxed the criteria a bit. We'll talk about it in the next slide, because my goal is to be right and not accurate to court level. The other story is about TJ Maxx. TJ Maxx is a well-known incident from last year. And since I changed my criteria, I added it pretty fast to the database saying it must be a web hack. And then 3 weeks afterwards, the press came out with the fact that it was actually war driving. Somebody getting into TJ Maxx stores wireless LANs and attacking that from there. So I took it out. Last month or 2 months ago, the FTC released their report again. And what they said is that even though it was a wireless attack, once the bad guys were in, they attacked end nodes in stores. In order to invade the data centers, they did use SQL injection. So I have to put it back in. So things are not easy. So apart from attack type, I'm trying to classify the outcome. That's very important because I want to know what's the real damage done. It's also a criterion. I'm trying to put just thing that has some significant outcome, not just bragging. I'm trying to track the type of organization attack, the country from which it was attacked, and the country where it operates, etc., etc. Currently, we have few hundreds incidents. It's not a big number. The statistics I'll show later about 2007 are based on 100 incidents. It's not enough, but that's the state of the knowledge we have. People don't tell us. More than that, I personally know about a pretty large number of other incidents through my company, from places where we get to sell a product after someone was hacked, or that we are in monitoring mode and then we have to go to blocking mode in 20 minutes because something is happening. But this is only about publicly disclosed incidents. Okay, so criteria. Criteria is probably one of my biggest problems with the web hacking in the database. Today I'm trying to focus, first of all, it's just web hacking. That's why I'm talking about it today. Secondly, it's just publicly disclosed stories. It's a problem. It also ensures to some degree that it has importance. It's not, and of course, it has a very important legal aspect. I don't want to tell you things I'm not supposed to tell you. The main problem is what's an incident of interest. And there's a lot of my own and other people who work with me sort of way of thinking into deciding that. And I'm sure it affects the statistics that we get to. 2007 was a great year for the web hacking incident database. There was a lot of web hacking. They were along the old lines of being targeted, and I have great statistics about them, which I'll share with you. 2008 is developing, and I've tried to create a mid-year report, and I failed. 2008 is developing into being a year where the web hacking incident database has to look for its future. The main reason is this one. The numbers are huge. Because of the SQL injection bots that I'll discuss briefly later on, the number of web hacking incidents is just sky high. So if I have to report 468,000 events, it doesn't work the way I report events until now. I have to move to report groups of events, families of events, types of events. Doesn't work that way anymore. The other thing I found out is that this type of attacks also capture the media. So many of the events that I do have specific stories about in the media are actually examples of these attacks. Because these attacks from time to time penetrate very interesting sites. So I have a Microsoft site somewhere in the world that was attacked, or some other security company, or a big newspaper site that was attacked. But it always goes back to this type of attack. So I don't think that other attacks disappeared. I guess they are just as common. But they are not reported as much because it's easy to report those. And we'll talk about SQL injection bot in a few moments. So we have a big question as to where we go. Other problems we see over the years with the web hacking incident database is that it mostly include incidents in English-speaking countries. Not necessarily the US, a lot of the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. I speak English and Hebrew, but that's a small country in the Middle East. So I speak English, and the people working with me also speak English, so we don't expand beyond. which is of course an issue. Did I don't speak any other language? I think it's just a matter of what we know. I get Google alerts. That's where I take my hackings from, and I get Google alerts in English. I read mailing lists, which are mostly in English, so they are focusing. I read the WASP mailing list, the WebAppSec mailing list. It's in English. I guess that in South America there are Spanish lists. I don't read them. We do get from time to time somebody from these countries to send us incidents, but the numbers are much smaller. So what did we find out? Probably the first question you want an answer for is, what are the most common attack methods? So in 2007, and the picture is different, but the same trends in 2008, the most common attack was SQL injection, which is a surprise because it always comes second or third in most studies which are based on vulnerabilities. Cross-site scripting, which is always at the top, is only third, fourth. It is common. It is used. It's not something you should ignore. It's not a tiny slice. The one thing which was in 2007 still a very tiny slice was cross-site request forgery. It's somewhere in the other section. It was something like 2%, very small number of incidents. You should remember, new things are also harder to report. The incident investigators don't know what they found when they find it. And probably the last one, which may need to affect the next version of the OWASP top 10, is misconfiguration. We found out that at the end of the day, misconfiguration, putting the wrong files in the wrong place, not fixing known vulnerabilities, which might be integrated in other parts of the chart as well, but I put it in a different slice, are responsible for nearly 3 out of 10 attacks. And they were removed from the OWASP top 10 in the last version because they are old. I think that one of the things that we see here, they take the bad guys a very long period of time to acquire new technology. We speak about it for years, we researchers, but the bad guys find good ways to exploit it, and it's not technical ways, it's mostly economical way to exploit it only years after. The most commonly used attack these days is SQL injection. It exists, it's known for how many years? At least, yes. The first company doing web application firewall started in 2007. They were there for solving SQL injections. And now the bad guys are starting to take advantage of that. So cross-site request forgery would be very big in a few years' time. What did we learn more than that? So I don't like this slide. The reason I don't like this slide is because it shows exactly where the web hacking in the database has its own problems. At the end of the day, the two things mostly disclosed are defacements and information leakage. And therefore, that's what we see here. But it's a good time to mention another way to use the web hacking in the database. Look for the incidents that are of interest to you. You come from a specific industry segment, look for incidents in companies like you. You have to study a specific type of vulnerability, go to the vulnerabilities relevant to you. So we have stories about denial of service attacks, and we have stories about extortion using denial of service attacks. We don't have many of them, but they are good for you when you have to go to your managers and convince them the problem is there. It's not all about statistics, you know, yes?
What has been the impact of cross-site scripting?
What type of attacks are in...
What has been the impact of cross-site scripting?
I would say that it's an interesting question. I didn't do this cross-tabbing of this and the previous slide. I would say there's a very good match between SQL injection and leakage. And so cross-site scripting goes to other parts. It might be defacement. A lot of phishing attacks use cross-site scripting to be more genuine. That's the sort of things that are attributed to cross-site scripting. But it's a good idea to do that next time. Okay. Now this one is interesting. Which organizations are attacked? So first of all, government organizations, at least on our database, are high up. Very, very prominent. My guess is that it has some truth in it, but there are other issues with the government. The government discloses more. It has a liability to disclose, especially in English-speaking countries. Maybe if I went to other type of countries, the government would be the one to disclose the least. But they do disclose more. It may be also that they have more, stable, old-fashioned security teams or IT in general, so they are less adept to mitigating new threats. Something to look into. The second largest probably is education. Now education suffers from the same problems as government. Need to disclose, stable, arcane, old times in IT and security. There's also a very big challenge in protecting educational networks because they have to be open. Retail. We see more retail than you would think. And I guess that the analysis I didn't do as to what type of attacks are targeted at retail, and again, the number of incidents is not big enough to have a very meaningful cross-tabbing, is that retail is about stealing credit card information. And that shows us why PCI is so important, because it happens. Because they don't work well, they lose information, and we need PCI to protect us. And they are doing a lot due to PCI. They are investing money. You should know that retail shops that you see on the net might seem small, sound small, but be very big. We have a customer who's selling, gadgets online. It has a gadgety name. And when we got there, we found 3 people doing IT security, everything, and they sell for 150 million a year. So these are the environments we are getting into, and they are hacked, and therefore PCI has to force them to protect their environment. I grouped together 3 things, which I'll talk about later. We are starting to see more attacks targeted directly at internet-based businesses. Might be media, might be hosting providers or service providers. It might be, the search engines of the world. I'll talk about it later. I think there's a business model there. There's a reason for that, and there's a big security issue there. And lastly, the banks. Don't think that they do security better than they do finance. But on the other hand, just like they were able not to tell us how bad was their credit situation for a couple of years, they are very good in not telling us how bad their security situation is. So maybe next year will be the year of the banks in my charts. Today they are very low there. And by the way, it also means they are slower in adapting technology. Because when I look at what I see in the market, PCI is driving retail shops smaller than you think to invest a lot in security, in web security, and the bank dinosaurs are not doing enough. Okay, so what's new for 2008? I think that until now, I told you we had 100 stories in 2007. We were focusing, the bad guys were focusing on targeted attacks. Targeted attacks are one-time sort of sting jobs. So they don't scale. It's nice, it's like, Ocean 11, like Ocean 11 sort of. But it doesn't create a large organized crime sort of business. And I think that last year, the bad guys found how to use web application vulnerabilities in order to create a sustainable business model for them. In essence, we found out this year that web hacking is replacing malware, which were the key way the bad guys were working 3 years ago, and viruses from 6 years ago, as the major security threat exploited by the bad guys. How do they do it? The way they do it is by going after the desktops through the websites. So it's not anymore trying to penetrate a specific bank to steal money. It's going after the masses of desktops through the websites. As a result, one of the things that happened is that if in the past smaller sites did not have a lot to fear from due to the reason that there was nothing to lose there, think about an informational site. When I started doing web application security, I always heard, it's an informational site, we don't have a problem, there's no need to protect it. Nobody will hack it. Now, these small sites, these non-important sites of large organizations, these mom and dad shops sites, are used by the bad guys in order to attack the desktops and at times the big guys. How do they do that? So there are 3 examples I'll cover here. One of them is the SQL injection bot, which go after websites, deface them, and inserts malware injecting code into them to go after their clients. The second one would be web bot herding. Botnets are a big thing. They used to be something that was based on desktops. We see more and more websites serving as bots in a botnet. And lastly, we'll talk about the problem with service providers, hosting providers, and such. The SQL injection crawlers. Starting around January, we're starting to see a new, very big phenomenon. I guess you'll see it more than once in this conference, of somebody writing bots that attack mostly SQL Server. We think that we are looking for code that attack other databases. We still don't have, we still attack attempts on other web server, but without payload. So we don't know if there is really good code attacking other database servers. This code is pretty malicious. What it does is it's a single SQL injection targeting randomly websites found through Google. What it does is select all the columns in all the tables in the database, iterate over them, and then appends a malware injection script tag to each field. The assumption behind that is that some of those fields, as fields are, will be displayed back to a customer. So a customer will see it and will be infected by malware. This is a malware spreading method. And it's common. The list I've shown you before with a huge number of sites penetrated is based on these attacks and variants of it. It's mostly targeting MS SQL. If you think about it, it's a very malicious attack because it just tries to, it damages the site beyond repair in many cases just to do something through it. The interesting part is that it's very easy to protect from. You don't really need anything special. Signatures which I wrote for our products 4 or 5 years ago cover that. Some database security would cover that. It's not that hard, and still the number of sites getting hit by it is just huge. What do we see new about this type of attacks? So one thing we see a lot is that it's attacking other types of infrastructure. It's not ASP or ASP.NET anymore. It's any type of scripting language as long as there's MS SQL behind it. And we saw some in the web, in the Honeypot project, we see some signs of different type of attacks being carried on to other databases. The other interesting thing is that we see more complex code being used. This is a good example. This is a snippet of a new variant of the attack that checks that no new, that the server, the website is not already infected. So not to have double infection. Double infection is bad because the script might not work right, because the chances of the application being destroyed and not serve its purpose for the attacker are bigger. So they are getting smarter. We also see management consoles for the attackers for those things. So, you know, a Windows program that does all the work, is sold, like MPEG for malware. So we have now the MPEGs for those type of attacks. Bot herding, the second example I was talking about. We see a lot of attacks like that, where people are trying to upload to websites scripts in the language that the web server knows how to execute, using a large number of vulnerabilities. The interesting thing here, usually very easy to detect, by the way, is the payload. And when you look at the payload, you find that it's just a bot script. They're using the web server penetrated as a botnet. If you think about it, it's much, much more stable than using desktop as a botnet. They're always there. They're easy to command. You don't need difficult channels to get to them. You just issue an HTTP request and you get to them. So we see control methods, attack methods. This specific script is about doing denial of service attacks on the network layer, interestingly. Lastly, hacking service providers. We see a lot of relatively easy attacks carried towards service providers. Hosting providers are the most attacked ones. The reason is that there is a problem there with separation between different accounts. So if you attack one customer, at times even if you buy an account for yourself, you will be eventually able to attack other bigger customers on the same server or network. A good example is one of our stories this year. It's about Metasploit. The Metasploit website was defaced. Now this is pretty bad. Why is it pretty bad? Because they were just defacing. But think about somebody going and changing the Metasploit download. Metasploit is a software used by pen testers to penetrate sites. Now, assuming that I add to its code something which leaves a backdoor for the bad guys each time a penetration tester gets into a site. That's evil. That's bad. Luckily, hopefully, these guys didn't do that. How did they penetrate the Metasploit website? Actually, they never did it. They never penetrated it. They penetrated another host on the same hosting vendor network and then did ARP spoofing to take on the request and answer instead of the Metasploit web server. But it served the same purpose. And we have other stories in the web hackings in the database that address the same issue. Hosting services are sort of offer a very, very, very interesting business model. As a summary, I would like to say that when you look for a risk, when you look at how vulnerable is your website and whether you have to fix things, think about the business model of the bad guys. Is there a business model there? Is there a reason to go after you? In the past, it was the value of your website. Today, it might be your website as part of a larger scale business model they are employing to get to others. This is the email. This is the project website. Do I have time for a question or two? 2 questions? Anyone? Okay. Feel free to come to me here or at the bridge booth later on to ask any question you have. Thank you for your participation.